Has anything changed about whose decision this pregnancy was? Rachel stopped packing and stared at me as if I had slapped her. Behind her, the emergency room doors swung shut, hiding my wife of 18 years from view. Melisot's earlier and her entire family had called me Rachel stepped closer. Your wife could lose the baby, Ethan. Baby, I corrected. Melissa made that distinction very clear. You cold, selfish. A doctor approached with a clipboard. Mr. Stanley, we need to know whether you'll be authorizing Transcend. There may also be financial forms. Require and I looked at the clipboard but didn't take it. No. The waiting room fell silent. For months, they had told me I had no voice because it was Melissa's body and Melissa's choice. Now why signature, my money, and my unquestioning support? Rachel's face tightened. After 18 years, you're abandoning her. No, I said. I'm refusing to be included only when you need someone to carry the burden. Melissa's mother covered her mouth. David shook his head like I was a stranger who had wandered into. Melissa's cousins raised her phone and began. Ray, I saw the red light. You're filming this? I asked. People should know what kind of man you are, she replied. Within minutes, the video was already moving through the family group chats. By the time I sat down, coward, controlling husband, how could you leave your pregnant wife during surgery? None of them mentioned that the child wasn't ours. None of them mentioned that Melissa had secretly volunteered to carry her sister's baby, started every concern I raised with the same 5 words. Body, my choice. I had respected her right to make that choice, but no one in that waiting room believed I had the right to make one of my own. Rachel pointed toward the operating room. Melissa risked everything for this family. She risked our marriage without asking me. You didn't need to be asked. That sentence explained more than Rachel realized. For 18 years, I had believed Melissa and I were partners. We discussed mortgages, jobs, Medicare future. But with one decision, she had reduced The doctor returned. Mr. Stanley, I need an answer. You have it. Rachel lunged forward. You owe her after 18 years. My phone vibrated again. This time, it wasn't another insult. An email had arrived from a law firm. I opened the attachment and saw Melissa's signature beneath a date from 3 weeks earlier. She had already prepared divorce papers before the emergency ever happened. I stared at the divorce papers on my phone while Rachel's words echoed through the waiting room. You owe her after 18 years. For a moment, everything around me faded. Then my mind carried me back to the night this entire nightmare began. It had started with tears. Melissa sat beside me on the couch, twisting a tissue between her fingers. Ethan. Rachel got another call from her fertility specialist today. I reached over and squeezed her hand. Happened, Melissa swallowed. Another IVF cycle failed. I felt my chest tighten. Rachel and David had spent years trying to have a child. We'd all celebrated every hopeful update, and I'm really sorry, I said. I can't imagine what they're going through, Melissa nodded. Devastated. Several minutes we talked about possible options, adoption, another IVF attempt, even taking a break from treatments. I rubbed my chin. If money is becoming the issue, maybe we can help. Melissa looked surprised. You do that? They're family. If another treatment gives them a chance, I'd rather help with that than watch them lose hope. She smiled for the first time that evening. I knew you'd understand. I believed we were having one of those conversations that strengthened a marriage. I had no idea she was already several steps ahead of me. 3 days later, Melissa came home unusually cheerful. Solved Rachel's problem. Looked up from my laptop. What do you mean? She took a deep breath. I'm going to carry their baby. I blinked. What? I'm going to be Rachel's surrogate. The words landed like concrete. I waited for her to smile, to tell me she was thinking out loud. She didn't. Already told them yes. My stomach tightened. Already agreed. She nodded. So relieved. I stood slowly. Melissa, when were you planning to discuss this with me? I am discussing it. I replied quietly. You're informing me. She folded her arms. There's a difference. A huge one. I walked into the kitchen trying to gather my thoughts. Not saying no, I said carefully. I'm saying this changes everything for us. Melissa leaned against the counter. It's 9 months. It isn't just 9 months, she frowned. What else is it? You'll have medical appointments. I know, there are risks. I know, you may have complications. I know, you'll need recovery afterward. I know, I took a slow breath. If something goes wrong. I'll be the one taking time off work to help you, she shrugged. This affects both of us. She looked at me with an expression I'd never seen before. It's still my body. I'm aware, so it's my decision. I nodded slowly. Yes, she looked almost victorious. I knew you'd understand. I didn't say that. The next evening, Rachel and David came over for dinner. Rachel hugged Melissa before she'd even taken off her coat. My hero. David opened a bottle of wine. To the most selfless woman I know. Everyone toasted. I set my glass down untouched. Rachel noticed. Aren't you celebrating? I have questions. Her smile disappeared. What questions? I'd like to understand the medical risks. Rachel rolled her eyes. Doctors have that covered. I'd like to understand the legal side. David laughed, overthinking it. I'd like to understand what happens if Melissa develops complications. Rachel's expression hardened. Why are you making this about yourself? I'm asking because she's my wife. Melissa sighed loudly. Ethan, no, I interrupted gently. These aren't unreasonable questions. Rachel crossed her arms. They sound like excuses. David nodded. I think you're just uncomfortable because you can't control the situation. I stared at him. Finally spoke. My body. Rachel finished the sentence. My choice. Three of them exchanged satisfied looks as if the discussion were over. Meanwhile, every concern I'd raised about our marriage had been brushed aside without a single reel for the first time in 18 years. I felt like an outsider inside my own marriage over the following weeks. Melissa became increasingly distant. She started saying she had appointments, without telling me where she was going. Some evenings she wouldn't come home until after 10 because she was planning everything. With Ratch, whenever I asked what they were planning, she'd answer with one word. Details. Details I apparently wasn't allowed to know. One Friday night, she came home exhausted and headed straight for the shower. Her purse remained on the dining room chair. Her phone buzzed repeatedly inside it. I reached over, intending only to silence the vibration. As I lifted the purse, several folded documents slipped onto the floor. Across the top of one page were the words, Fertility Center. My eyes moved lower. Then I saw the dates. Every appointment listed there had taken place before Melissa ever sat beside me on the couch. Before she cried. Before she told me Rachel's IVF had failed. Before she claimed she had just decided to become Rachel's surrogate. I slowly lowered myself into a chair, staring at the paperwork. The timeline made only one thing possible. Melissa hadn't made the decision after talking to me. She had already begun the entire process before she ever told her own husband. The only question left was, how long had she been lying to me before she finally confessed? You've all been invited because we finally have something worth celebrating. Rachel's voice carried across the backyard before I had even reached the patio. I had accepted Melissa's invitation because she promised we would finally have an honest conversatio. I don't want us fighting anymore, she'd told me. I don't either. I believed her. As I walked through the gate carrying a bottle of wine, I realized I had walked into something completely. Nearly 30 relatives were gathered around Rachel and David's backyard. My parents-in-law, aunts, uncles, cousins, neighbors. Everyone smiled when they saw Melissa standing beside Rachel. Then I noticed the small gift bag decorated with tiny footprints. My stomach sank. Rachel tapped her glass with a spoon. Can I have everyone's attention? The conversation stopped. She reached for Melissa's hand. I have the greatest news of my life. Melissa smiled proudly. Embryo transfer worked. For a second, the yard was silent. Then applause erupted. People hugged Rachel. Others hugged Melissa. David wiped away tears before wrapping both women in a hug. Someone shouted, "We're finally having a baby." I stood frozen near the grill, feeling like I'd accidentally wandered into someone else's celebratio. No one looked at me. No one asked how I was doing. No one even acknowledged that Melissa's decision had nearly destroyed our marriage. Rachel raised her glass again. I especially want to thank my incredible sister. Everyone applauded once more. Melissa laughed nervously. Rachel continued. She stayed strong even when certain people didn't believe a woman should have complete control over a few. Heads slowly turned toward me. Melissa didn't stop her. She simply lowered her eyes and smiled. One cousin shook his head. I can't believe someone would try to stop this. Another relative muttered loudly enough for everyone to hear. Some men just can't handle not being in charge. David walked over and clapped my shoulder. Come around eventually. I removed his hand. You've mistaken concern for control. Rachel folded her arms. No, Ethan, you've mistaken marriage for ownership. Several people nodded. Melissa remained silent. Not once did she say I had never opposed helping Rachel. Not once did she explain that I'd only wanted an honest conversation before life-changing decisions. Her silence told everyone I deserved the accusations. I finally stepped forward. Like to say something. Rachel sighed dramatically. Ethan, No, I've listened long enough. Backyard became quiet. Never said Rachel shouldn't become a mother. I looked directly at Rachel. I never objected to helping your family. Then I turned toward Melissa. I objected to finding out after the decision had already been made. Nobody spoke. I objected to being excluded from conversations that affect my marriage. I paused. I objected to discovering that appointments had already begun before my wife even told me. Rachel immediately laughed. Listen to him. She turned toward the guests. Today is supposed to be joyful, and somehow he's still trying to make himself the victim. David raised his hands. Can we please not ruin this day? Several relatives nodded in agreement. One aunt whispered loudly enough for everyone to hear. If he really loved Melissa, he'd support her. Another cousin added, she's sacrificing her body for family. What's he sacrificing? The discussion was over before it had truly begun. Facts had no place there. Emotion had already won. Melissa looked at me for only a moment. I'm sorry you feel hurt. I'm sorry I lied, not. I'm sorry I excluded you, only. I'm sorry you feel hurt. I quietly picked up my jacket. No one tried to stop me. Later that evening, I returned home alone. Melissa texted that she would be staying overnight at Rachel's house because they wanted to celebrate. I walked into our kitchen to pour myself a glass of water. Then I noticed my banking app had sent several transaction alerts. I frowned. Vacation savings account. Withdrawal. Another withdrawal. Another. By the time I opened the account, more than $12,000 had disappeared. I immediately called Melissa. She answered on the third ring. What? Our vacation fund. What about it? $12,000 is gone. Oh, it went toward the surrogacy expenses. I gripped the kitchen counter. You used our savings. It's for family. You didn't even tell me. I didn't think you'd understand. You didn't think I deserved to know, she exhaled impatiently. Ethan, stop making everything about yourself. The line went dead the next afternoon. Melissa came home to collect a few things before another appointment. Rachel arrived minutes later carrying a large accordion folder stuffed with paperwork. Leave this here while we grab the nursery paint samples. Two sisters hurried back outside after realizing they'd forgotten something in Rachel's SUV. Remained in the kitchen. The folder sat only a few feet away. A single sheet had slipped halfway out. Across the top, I read, Emergency medical contact. Curious, I pulled the page free, then another. And another. Every document listed the same name. ETHAN Stanley, responsible spouse, emergency decision maker, primary financial contact. My pulse quickened. I flipped through the remaining pages. Insurance forms, hospital authorizations, financial responsibility acknowledgments. Page after page assumed I had agreed to obligations no one had ever discussed with me. No one had even asked. I slowly pulled out my phone. One by one. I photographed every single page. Then I carefully returned every document to its exact position inside the folder before Melissa, and neither of them realized I had just uncovered the first real proof that the deception ran far deeper. The attorney didn't say a word for nearly a full minute. He flipped through the printed copies of every document I'd photographed, occasionally circling a P. Finally, he looked up. Ethan. His tone alone made my stomach tighten. This is much worse than I expected. I leaned forward. Bad. He tapped one of the insurance forms. Did you ever agree in writing to serve as Melissa's emergency financial contact? No. You authorize any of these medical arrangements? No. He slid another document across his desk. Did anyone explain that some of these forms assume you'll be responsible for post-treatment expense? I stared at the page. No. He nodded slowly. I didn't think so. For the next hour, he walked me through every document, one by one. Each page uncovered another decision that had been made without me. Medical waivers, insurance exclusions, emergency authorization forms, financial acknowledgments, transportation responsibilities after procedures, recovery planning. Every document assumed one thing, that Melissa's husband would naturally step in whenever something became difficult, except no one had ever asked whether that husband agreed. Built this entire arrangement, my attorney said, on the assumption that once the pregnant. I rubbed my forehead. So they expected me to have no choice. Exactly. I drove home carrying a folder that suddenly made 18 years of marriage feel unfamiliar. Melissa was sitting at the kitchen island when I walked in. She looked up. Been avoiding me. Been getting answers. She frowned. What does that mean? I placed copies of the documents on the counter. She recognized them instantly. Her face lost its color. Where did you get those? I think the better question is why I had to get them without my wife's knowledge. She remained silent. I opened one page. This lists me as financially responsible. Another, this makes me your emergency medical contact. Another, this assumes I'll provide transportation and recovery care. I looked directly into her eyes. When were you planning to tell me? Melissa folded her arms. I wasn't. Honesty stunned me more than another lie would have. I knew you'd say no, she admitted quietly. Never said no. You would have. I wanted a conversation. You would have tried to stop me. I shook my head. No, Melissa, she looked away. I couldn't take that chance. So instead, I gestured toward the paperwork. You took away my chance to decide whether I could live with any of this. She didn't answer. After several seconds, she whispered, once I became pregnant. She paused. I knew you'd have no choice. Those words settled over the room like concrete. No choice. That had been the entire plan, not honesty, not partnership. Entrapment. I walked upstairs without another word. Melissa followed. Ethan. I opened the closet. What are you doing? I pulled out 2 suitcases. Ethan, stop. I calmly folded shirts into the first suitcase. We can still work this out. When? I asked without looking up. After you lied, she didn't answer. After you signed legal documents, silence. After you spent our savings, nothing. Or after you decided I'd eventually surrender because you thought I wouldn't leave. She sank onto the edge of the bed. I made mistakes. I zipped the suitcase. You made choices. By sunset, I had moved into a furnished apartment across town. The following morning, I opened separate bank accounts. That afternoon, I instructed my attorney to file for divorce for the first time in months. I wasn't reacting. I was making decisions. The response from Melissa's family came almost immediately. Rachel called first. You actually filed? Yes. You can't abandon your wife because she helped her sister. I didn't. You abandoned her because you couldn't control her. I divorced her because she destroyed our marriage before telling me. Rachel hung up. Minutes later, David called. I hope you can live with yourself. I already do. You'll regret this. I think you'll regret assuming I would keep sacrificing myself after being excluded from every impo. He disconnected without another word. Within hours, relatives began posting vague messages online about betrayal, loyalty, and selfish whose no one mentioned the hidden contracts. No one mentioned the financial obligations. No one mentioned the months of deception. 3 weeks later, my phone rang just after 6 in the morning. Rachel. I almost ignored it. Instead, I answered. Her voice was nothing like before. No anger, no arrogance, only panic. Ethan. I remained silent. Been complications. My grip tightened around the phone. Melissa's been admitted. I closed my eyes. The silence stretched between us. Doctors say she'll need someone with her for weeks. Still, I said nothing. Rachel continued. David's working overtime. My parents can't stay. Can't manage everything by myself. She took a shaky breath. We need you to come back. Words almost sounded unreal. For months they had insisted I had no place in this pregnancy. Now they suddenly remembered I existed, not as a husband, not as family, as someone to carry the burden they could no longer manage. Rachel's voice cracked. Please, she needs you. I finally spoke. Every word was calm. Every word was deliberate. My baby. A long silence followed, then I finished the sentence. My problem. Rachel didn't respond. The line stayed open for several seconds before I heard her quietly whisper, I never thought you'd actually mean that. Then she hung up. I placed the phone on the kitchen counter and stared out the apartment window. For the first time in months, I didn't feel guilty. I felt certain. The next morning, my attorney called. Finished reviewing everything. Anything new? Quite a bit. I met him that afternoon. He spread several enlarged copies of the documents across the conference table. These dates matter. He pointed to the earliest contract. Melissa signed this almost 3 months before she told you Rachel's IVF had failed. He slid another page toward me. This planning agreement was signed 2 weeks later. Another. This recovery schedule names you as the person responsible for transportation, meals, medication. I stared at the pages. They planned my role. Before I even knew there was a plan. My attorney nodded. Exactly. He opened a printed email chain Rachel had written. Once she's pregnant, Ethan won't have a choice. He'll complain, but he'll step up. He always does. Another email from David followed. He'll calm down after the first ultrasound. He's too responsible to walk away. Leaned back in my chair. For months, I had wondered whether I was overreacting. Those emails answered every question. They had never intended to ask for my support. They intended to trap me into giving it. As the divorce moved forward, my attorney requested financial records. The bank statements told the same story. Our vacation savings had been drained. Medical deposits had already been paid. Legal consultations had been scheduled. Insurance policies had been updated. Every major commitment had happened long before Melissa finally sat beside me on the couch pretending she hadn't been seeking my support. She'd been rehearsing how to tell me the decision had already been made. Meanwhile, the story Rachel had spread online began to fall apart. At first, everyone believed I had abandoned my wife during a medical emergency. Then relatives started asking questions. When exactly did Melissa tell Ethan? Did he really know about all this? Why was his name on legal documents he never signed? Rachel couldn't answer. Melissa couldn't answer either. Eventually, one of Melissa's cousins, the same one who had recorded me in the hospital waiting room, "See, I owe you an apology. You don't owe me anything," posted things about you that weren't true. "You posted what you believed." "No," she sighed. "I posted what Rachel told me." A few days later, she deleted every post and publicly admitted she hadn't known the full story. Others followed. One by one, relatives who had called me controlling began admitting they had never heard my side. Several even confronted Rachel. "You told us Ethan opposed surrogacy." "Didn't?" "You said he refused to help. Offered to pay for another IVF cycle. Never mentioned the hidden contracts." Rachel had no defense, because there wasn't one. Melissa remained at Rachel's house after leaving the hospital. At first, everyone insisted they would manage. Rachel would take care of her. David would handle the expenses. Their parents would help around the house. Reality arrived much faster than promises. Rachel still had a full-time job. David's overtime became mandatory because medical bills continued to grow. Melissa needed far more help recovering than anyone expected. Appointments multiplied. Medication schedules became exhausting. The emotional strain spread through the entire household. The same people who had insisted everything would be easy slowly stopped saying that. Over the next several weeks, Melissa called me more than a dozen times. The first voicemail was angry. "Ethan, I can't believe you're doing this." The second sounded tired. "We need to talk." Third was different. "I'm sorry." Eventually, the messages became simple. "Call me. Just want to explain. Never thought it would end like this." I listened to every message. I answered none of them, not because I hated Melissa, because nothing she could say would change what had already happened. Trust isn't destroyed in one conversation. It's destroyed through hundreds of deliberate choices. She had made hers. The divorce concluded 8 months later. Everything was handled according to the law. Because I had separated my finances early and documented every hidden agreement, I wasn't held responsible. Neither side appealed. There was nothing left to argue. The marriage had ended long before the paperwork did. A few months later, Rachel gave me unexpected news through a mutual relative. The baby had been born healthy. I smiled when I heard it. An innocent child had entered the world. That child had never been the problem. I genuinely hoped Rachel and David would become loving parents. Children deserve that, regardless of how adults behave. Nearly a year after leaving, I found myself sitting on the porch of a small home I'd recently purchased. No shouting. No manipulation. No one demanding that I sacrifice myself to fix decisions I had never been allowed to influence. Just peace. A neighbor walked over while I was planting flowers. "Just move in," I smiled. "Few weeks ago. Married." I looked toward the quiet house behind me. "Anymore." He nodded without asking another question. Some stories don't need explaining. Looking back, I realized something that took me 18 years to understand. Respecting someone else's choices doesn't mean surrendering your own boundaries. Melissa had every right to make decisions about her body. She never had the right to secretly volunteer my life, my finances, and my future along with it. When she chose deception over partnership, she also chose the consequences that followed. People still ask whether I regret walking away. My answer has never changed. I didn't walk away from my wife because she became a surrogate. I walked away because she stopped treating me like her husband long before she ever became one. And when she said, "My body, my choice," I respected her completely. When the consequences arrived, she had to respect mine. Not my baby, not my problem.